UKIP has fallen prey to a fresh bout of infighting in the wake of its defeat in Stoke-on-Trent Central. While some in the party are licking their wounds, others are rubbing salt and vinegar into them. Nigel Farage called on Douglas Carswell, UKIP's sole MP in the Commons, to quit the party. He even called his colleague a posh Tory boy for good measure. For his part, Carswell insisted he was 100% UKIP. Diane James, MEP, is a former leader of UKIP, but after her brief 18-day reign, decided to sit in the European Parliament as an independent. Rob Ford of Manchester University is co-author of Revolt on the Right, a study into UKIP's rise. I asked Diane James if there was more to this than a personality clash.
I do think actually it relates to a much bigger picture. When you go back to what were the initial basics and basis for supporters that were drawn to UKIP, in my view, it attracted individuals from effectively two sides of the spectrum, and they had two goals. One was EU exit and one was reform the political system in the United Kingdom. Now, they tended to be what I would call mavericks. They tended to be get up and go individuals. They tended to be individuals that really wanted action. They got the first bit of the action. They won that first battle, which is the EU exit. Now they're moving on to the next one. But this is where the harmony between those two elements is starting to become fractured. And that's where I think we're at the moment.
And Rob Ford, what do you think are the big dividing lines within UKIP? I mean, are they significant? Is it about a libertarian party versus a protectionist party? Or is there something else going on?
Well, I think it's rather revealing that Diane James missed the issue that is the single strongest predictor of UKIP support in the electorate as a whole. Much of their activists following, many of their funders came to the party motivated primarily by a desire to leave the EU. That, of course, is the issue that UKIP was founded to achieve. That is the issue that attracted Douglas Carswell, who is a liberal in many respects on immigration and identity issues. But when you go and look at the people who vote for UKIP, it's very clear what the biggest motivation is for them. They want immigration controlled and they want a more assertive form of English nationalism.
Dan, do you agree with that? Immigration is really the key issue.
Immigration is a subject that, if it's not number one, it's certainly in the top two of issues, regardless of political affiliation. And that, has been demonstrated and is acknowledged, I believe, across the spectrum. Douglas Carswell would prefer to downplay the issue of immigration, whereas the Farage camp, those that recognise how important it is to voters across the political leaning, they are prepared to make much, much more of it and, to take a much harder line in terms of this is what voters want, we can reflect that in our policies and we don't want to see it downgraded or in any way submerged with other issues.
And Dan, you know Nigel Farage pretty well. I mean, isn't Nigel Farage right that Douglas Carswell should be expelled or should leave?
Well, I'm going to give you an opinion as an independent, so I'm no longer a member of UKIP, but just supposing UKIP was a company, that it had shareholders, that it was trying to achieve certain objectives, if that chairman of that company, if that CEO of that company, if the board had such an individual who's acting so destructively towards achieving what that organisation wanted, then I'm absolutely 100% convinced that that individual will be out of the door. It sounds very strong in terms of language, but I think that's the analogy that fits here.
And Rob Ford, I mean, despite Paul Nuttall's failure in Stoke, UKIP is still polling around 12% nationally. Have reports of their political death been somewhat exaggerated, do you think? Are they still a threat to both Labour and the Conservatives?
I certainly think so. As you point out, for one thing, they're still polling over 1 in 10 of the electorate, even in the immediate aftermath of achieving the goal that they were founded to achieve. Right now, very unusually, they're actually rather happy with the way politics are going. They're getting Brexit, and they're getting Brexit, at least on the rhetoric from the government, in more or less the form that they have been pushing for. But that's not likely to remain the case for very long, because we know that the Brexit negotiation process is going to be long and complicated and messy. And so at some point in the next few years, the argument that UKIP voters are not getting what they want will once again gain traction with voters who are not very inclined to trust political elites or give them much leeway in terms of things like negotiation.
And Dan, what's next for you? Are you tempted to return to the UKIP fold? You're an independent at the moment, but What would it take for you to go back to join Paul Nuttall's UKIP?
I'm going to duck that question, if you don't mind,
don't.
because, put it into context. I walked away from the party to allow the new leader a fresh field to actually deliver what they wanted in terms of strategy and for the future of that party. It wouldn't be fair on any leader for somebody who's made that decision, announced it in the public domain, to suddenly then return. So it's not on the cards. I'm just following the party with interest. Time will tell if there is any means or any, if you like, carrot that would entice me back, but I can't see it at present.
Diane James and Rob Ford on UKIP's inner battles.